Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I would like to start with this question. What are exactly emotions? And there is some difference between emotions and sentiment, for example.
Okay, first of all, let's distinguish between language and what emotions might actually serve as a function. Emotions are considered very, very basic elements of behavior that probably existed very early in the development of human beings, and they are made up of, according to most contemporary theories, of three components: physiology, which is sort of a bodily arousal and readiness for action; behavior, which is the action itself that is a consequence or associated with emotion; and the subjective internal experience. So you need all three basically to have an emotion, and so this three-part process has a function. Its function is to help us in survival, basically, like most of our behaviors. So emotions probably developed as a way to help us initiate action. So we consider them to be action preparation. So in this way they help us approach situations that are good for us, like things that have to do with reproduction, with food, with pleasant experiences, and they help us push away or avoid things that could be dangerous, threatening to our survival. So they're very fundamental, we need them to survive, and they have a specific purpose for existing. Now, sentiments I consider more of as a language thing. I'm not sure if it also exists in all language, the difference between sentiment and emotion. I would think that it pertains more to this one part that has to do with the subjective component. For example, you wouldn't say that an animal has sentiments, but some animals probably have emotions. So I think it's just one component of it, but emotions are broader and involve more things.
Okay, now I have another question. Why emotions are so important for our life and for our wellness?
Well, like we said before, they are essential for survival. They help us know how to act appropriately depending on what the demands of the environment are at that specific moment. For instance, if you see a bear or a wild animal in the distance, it's very crucial for your survival to experience something that initiates action to run away. At the same time, if you see an attractive potential partner close to you and you feel some excitement, then it's important to hear that part and make the appropriate moves to get closer to that potential partner. So being aware of our emotions and paying attention to our emotions helps us know what's good for us and what's not good for us. If we experience them on a very sort of basic fundamental level. Of course, in the development of human beings, we've developed language, we've developed thoughts, we've developed a lot of other components that, if they correspond to what the basic emotion says, they might help us in the same direction, but they also might change the action that our emotions propose we should take. Sometimes that's good, because sometimes we need to filter what emotions say, because we don't live in the same basic, simple world that our ancestors used to live in. But oftentimes, this too much processing of emotions also might create problems, because we don't really listen to what's basically good or bad for us. So they have a function, they are a very important source of information, at least that's what we usually tell our clients in therapy, and we need to use them as a very important source of information. Then we can decide if we want to follow the action that they tell us to take. But we need to know the information, because it's a very gut feeling, it's a very basic response of the body to what might be good or might be bad for us.
Okay, so I think that in our culture we have the beliefs that it's better be a logical person than an emotive person. Do you think it's true?
Actually, that idea started from Plato, who said that it's important to control basically or regulate our emotions. Some regulation is important for modern society because obviously we're not dealing with wild animals all the time or with physical survival, and we can't just sort of go ahead and grab whatever we like that's appetitive to us. So we do need to think about our actions before we take them. At the same time, I'm not really sure that there is this distinction between being logical or being emotive. You can't really be logical without an internal source of information regarding what's good for you. Then we'd be robots, we wouldn't be humans. At the same time, there's nobody who's really just emotional. We all do some processing, and after sort of metacognition of the emotional experience we have, But yes, there's individual differences on how much people rely on their emotions, use their emotions, and how well they do it. Using emotions is important. People who don't rely on their emotions at all tend to have some psychological difficulties sometimes, and also to the other degree that people are overly emotional and overly reactive to situations without being able to adjust to the changing demands of the environment also might involve some problems. So we need a balance, but I'm not sure that the two are opposite. I think the two processes come together and they are part of how emotions evolve from an initial reaction to then deciding what actual actions to take that are appropriate to the situation.
I like a lot this answer. So what do you think could happen if we don't listen, we don't take care about our emotions?
One of my areas of study that I like is in alexithymia. I'm not entirely sure what it is yet, but the official definition is that it involves processes in difficulties experiencing and expressing and regulating emotions. A basic component has to do with identifying emotions and describing them verbally. So alexithymia is related to a lot of psychological disorders, which suggests that being able to be aware of emotions and use them appropriately is important for mental health. We see a lot of people in therapy who really do have problems knowing what they feel, and that usually leads to a huge amount of confusion about what appropriate behavior should be. We can make judgments about our behavior based on a lot of things, on how other people react, on what might be a logical sequence of events, but if we don't have that very central piece of information about what's good for us or not good for us, then people get very confused about their behavior and their lives and their life goals. So I think emotions are very important in clarifying, first of all, our values, what's important to us, and also giving us information about the environment around us in terms of how good or how not good things are for us. Then we can use that information in whatever way we want, but it's a very crucial piece of information to have.
So basically, how we can learn to enter in contact with our emotions, understand them, and let us to listen them.
However, this time that we have to do that might be very, very brief, because there's a very early reaction, that's the emotion, and then there's all this meta-emotional processing that takes place, and it's not very easy always to distinguish what part we're listening to. I mean, if you listen to the second part, that's the meta-emotional, then you may end up, for example, worrying all the time. So if your thought keeps telling you this is dangerous, then if you keep thinking this is dangerous, this is worry. That's not healthy. The important part is to catch that really early emotional response. And I think that's very physical, it's very bodily. So I guess we guide our clients to be very focused on what do you feel right now and where do you feel it. That's a very important question. Usually people feel something in their stomach. So it's very important to concentrate on bodily reactions and what this initial action is that your body is trying to tell you to take. Do you feel like running? Do you feel like staying? Do you feel like smiling? But somebody has to be able to stay and focus on that initial bodily reaction. Do you feel aroused? Is it intense, what you're feeling? Because then we might sort of miss the moment and stay a lot with the metacognitive part of what's happening, which might not reflect necessarily the initial reaction.
What is exactly the metacognitive part?
That's when our reaction becomes language, and we try to interpret what we feel, and usually we try to interpret why we feel it. So we try to attribute what we feel to the environment. That's also important, but it's not the initial reaction. So initially we might have a positive response to a female or a male we see. We might have an emotional positive reaction, but if we also have some stereotypes, for instance, against some people, then we might immediately go into these rationalizations to why we should not be feeling that and change our reaction. So we need to catch our initial sense. Another example is sometimes patients are very confused about what they should do, and they keep asking their therapists, what do you think I should do in this situation? Do you think this person is safe for me? Do you think I should stay in this relationship? Do you think, what's the guidelines for how to choose my partner, for instance? Well, these people have these questions probably because they haven't listened to that very early reaction that tells them this is dangerous or this is safe. Because there's nobody who can tell you the answer to that. The first piece of information that's important is your gut feeling about the situation and how you respond to it. Later on, you might need to assess other pieces of information, other facts that you've collected over time. But if you don't take into account that initial piece of information about is this good for me or is this bad for me, then nobody can give you that answer.